Hey friends, welcome back to Thrive Online Healing Podcast. This is episode 67, and this week is for you driven people. So obviously, Dr. Carmen and I are both very driven, high achiever personality types. We also happen to be firstborn. I will speak for myself. I tend to be type A. I don't think that you're type A, Carmen.
I don't know. I would not consider myself type A.
No, so I will just own that out of this relationship. I am the type A one. But we're both very driven. And so I was talking to my coach this week because my coach coaches driven people, right? And we're not going to get into we're not trying to stereotype people, but I think there is some solace when you find people that are like you and are wired like you, and you kind of see like what drives them, what makes them tick, and also what is their Achilles, what is it called?
Achilles heel.
Achilles heel. Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about. So this is for all you driven high achievers out there. We're kind of going to get into what makes us tick and also dive into that Achilles heel. Because I think that those things, when we can understand, then we can start to work with who we are and stop working against ourselves.
Yes.
So I've noticed, and my coaches told me as well, us really driven people, our biggest hurdle in life is ourselves. We are the ones that get in our own way. Like, of all the different types of personalities, that is going to be like, we have no problem breaking through external hurdles. Like, most of the time we're pretty driven when people tell us like, well, you can't do that. Like, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire for us. We're like, oh yeah, and we'll do it. But it's the internal dialogue and the belief system that's always kind of holding a lot of us back from being the achievers that we desire and know internally we could be, or reaching the potential that we know we should be reaching.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that so far?
I think that I think you're exactly right. It can go both ways, right? That internal drive, I think, is what drives us to achieve, to see what we can do to be that driven, that motivated, right, person. But having that balance and quieting that internal dialogue can be a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, because sometimes we can use that to drive us, to move us forward, right, to be that motivating factor. But I think you're exactly right. I think that probably applies to all people, but we see it magnified, I think, in high achievers.
Yeah, I think because it's like the pain point is expressed more for high achievers, because it's like this constant frustration of like, I know I could get here. Why am I not here? Why can't I get there? Like, if somebody, like I used to say early on in coaching, like, I know I can be successful. I just need someone to teach me how to be. Show me the path and I can do it. But I obviously can't figure it out right now. And I know we all have very different definition of success, because, 5 years ago, you would have told me I was successful, right? I had a home, I had my cars paid off, right? I had a job and 401k. But for me, my definition of success, like, I was not successful. So I want to like kind of rewind, like, for us driven people, like where this came from a lot of the times. And the difference between driven people that are like, in my definition, really successful. So really successful for me is they have, fame and fortune, right? So that's kind of usually who I'm comparing to, is these like Elon Musk, these people, right, that have really like optimized their potential, done well for themselves. Like, why are they there versus I'm here? We're both driven, we're both ambitious. What's the difference? So drivenness, so there's 5 things in childhood. Like, so we're going to go back to child development. Okay. So that 0 to 7, and our little brains are processing information. So we're being programmed by our parents, we're being programmed by society, we're being programmed by our education system, our religion, etc. Right? Like we're being taught, somehow people say it, I say programmed. We're being taught how to think, how to view the world from that 0 to 7. And our brains are like a sponge. They're just absorbing that information, and then they're taking the way we see and interpret things and interpreting through all this programming and starting to create belief systems. We're making the building blocks for belief systems. And so here's where the kicker is. As our little brains are making these belief systems and interpreting events, we're experiencing wounds. All trauma, like I feel like all humans experience trauma. It's part of the human experience, right? I'm not speaking, like you could have a very traumatic childhood, like you go to the worst case scenario, right? Like kidnap, molestation, being beat, all these things, neglect, right? Or you could have a really good home life in terms of you have parents that really love you, they care for you, they make sure all your needs and your wants are met, they're emotionally supportive, right? It doesn't matter. Like your little brain is still interpreting events and is still receiving wounds. Because like in this really good home life situation here, perhaps little Kim spills her drink twice at the table. And her dad is like, seriously? Like can you just not pay attention? Pay attention to what you're doing, Kim. Right? It's not really a big deal. But my little brain interprets that as you can't make mistakes. You've disappointed him. The person that is your caretaker, you've disappointed him. You can't make mistakes. You have to be perfect. Right? And in that interpretation, then I started gathering more and more evidence where disappointment meant possible not being loved in my brain. Like affirming that belief that I needed to be perfect. Right?
Right.
So in these childhood wounds, we create, I've heard there's 5 shields, coping mechanisms that as humans we can gather. And one of them would be perfectionism. If I'm just perfect, I'll be loved and accepted, right? One of them is people pleasing, right? If I just do whatever mom and dad, whatever my family wants me to do, they'll love me and accept me. One of them is anger, right? Like I'll just use anger to cover this wound. Like they can't touch it anymore. One of them is invisibility. I'll just like, I won't be seen, I won't be heard, then I won't get in trouble, right? And then the last one is drivenness. I will just work as hard and I will perform to be accepted. I'll prove myself. I'll prove them wrong by proving myself. Okay. So as Carmen and I were talking, preparing for this episode, because I was wondering, like, because I know Carmen's story and she's going to share it. Like, she obviously has what it takes to be a doctor, right? But her path, her Achilles heel, made her take the long way around to get there. Okay. And I was like, why is that? Like, what is it about us driven people? Some people that are driven, just like you, went to Cornell and they went straight to med school.
Right.
Right. Like, what is the difference in them and you? And then the thought came to my brain, perhaps it's these childhood coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. They took on the drivenness, but they did not pick up the perfectionism.
Right.
So they were driven and they were willing to fail to get there versus, I only speak for me, I won't speak for you. For me, I picked up drivenism. Being driven was one of mine. And I also picked up perfectionism. And because I had that perfectionist to go with my drivenness, I couldn't fail. I wouldn't put myself in situations to fail. Right.
Yes.
And so it didn't allow me to skyrocket with that drivenness. It kept holding me back because you have to fail to succeed, because I was trying to manage that perfectionism.
Right. Yeah. I think from my perspective, I would still say that I was am driven, but I definitely got that people pleasing component when I was a kid, and my brain would find ways to people please, right? Like, I didn't want to let people down, right? So I would do things that I knew that they would find rewarding, right? Or that they would find, oh, okay, so let's see if I can give you an example. So my dad loved cars, right? He loved to work on old cars. So I would learn about old cars, right? To like be in good graces, right? If you will. And so I did that with with teachers. I did that with family members. I did that with bosses as I was growing up, as you would find something, that they enjoyed, and then I would use that to be able to still be driven and achieve what I wanted to achieve within that relationship, within that position, within those classes. But that was my underlying, right, like what kind of guided that drivenness. And so I think that when I got in situations where I couldn't people please, it really took me back, right? Like, it really made these very large detours, or like I tell people, speed bumps for me that at the time I couldn't see past, right? Like, I couldn't see how to get around it. So I changed gears. I said, all right, I'm going to put this goal down for now, right? And I'm just going to get through what I need to get through, and I'll kind of revisit it. Because when I was in college, I was on the pre-med track, right? Because I knew I wanted to be a doctor at 9 years old. I knew that. And so I was on that pre-med track. I was at a good school. I took all the classes they wanted me to take. And when it got to, I think I was the sophomore year, and you're like, going through and finalizing your major. And I was sitting down with my advisor, and my advisor at the time was head of the chemistry department. He had written the chemistry book. He was the head of the department. And he told me that as a minority woman, that I wouldn't be a very good doctor, that I wouldn't make it, that I wouldn't be successful. I wasn't smart enough. Right. And that really made me mad and frustrated. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. Well, I did well in chemistry, but he planted that seed, right? I couldn't use that. I couldn't use my people pleasing, mechanisms. And he planted that seed that maybe I wasn't enough. And in a university that was so large, they didn't offer, the classes were a little bit different, in that they offered a lot of auto tutorial classes, because I didn't know this at the time, but people would say, Cornell was one of the easier Ivy Leagues to get into, but the hardest to graduate from. So it was always felt like a continuously like weeding out process, right? Our starting class was significantly larger than our graduating class in 4 years. So I knew, right, like I needed to get through it. But a lot of those auto tutorial classes in biology and in physics didn't have great class averages because they didn't have instructors. You had to teach yourself, right? And so when I got to teaching myself physics, I got scared. And that seed that had been planted, that I wasn't enough, I wasn't smart enough, right? I wouldn't be able to teach myself these concepts, and I didn't have a support system. lean on, I found another direction, and I kind of jumped ship. I changed majors, and I was like, all right, there's got to be another way to do this, because I felt like I was jumping off the cliff with everybody else, right? If that class only for the last 4 years had an average of a D plus, I was like, I know that I can't get into med school with a D plus, so why would I put myself through that? So I found a different route.
Interesting, because there was a group of kids that did put themselves through it.
They did.
And they did get a D plus.
Yes.
That was okay enough for them. Like,
well, because it was so we were told that was the way you get to med school. You had to take these classes, you had to push through, but then you had to wait your what's it called? Your credits with easy classes, right? So you had to get that 4.0 in the first 2 years in order to outweigh that D that you knew was going to be coming up, because you couldn't get around it.
Yeah.
And I thought, why? I mean, there's always another way. Yeah, you can get around it. Why follow everybody else? But that was the path, the pre-med path they had outlined for everybody. Yeah. So the very first day, if you went through orientation, or even that first semester, and you brought up pre-med, they had a whole packet. They were like, this is what you have to do to get into med school. Yeah. And so I thought, I don't need to follow everybody else, right? Everybody else's path is different. So I found a different way to use my drivenness to get here. But I mean, it was, it did take me a little while, because it was that fear that I wouldn't be smart enough, right? Yeah. It was that fear that I wouldn't be smart enough to be able to pass physics, of all things. And now I love physics, but at the time, even when I decided to go back to school, it was my biggest hurdle. I was so scared to take physics at ECU, but I absolutely loved it. It was my most favorite class. And I kind of thought, well, I don't know why I was so scared of it when I was in college, but
because you had a belief that you weren't smart enough to do it. Not even that, you had a belief that you weren't capable of learning that way, so you wouldn't do well.
Yeah. So that overpowered my drivenness for that stint. Yeah. And so I pursued something different in hopes of still, getting bits and pieces of working with people in the medical field. But I had to, I don't know, I found a different way.
Which I think is so interesting in your story, that you're like, I mean, it's a testament to your determinism, if that's a word, that you're like, okay, not going to do pre-med anymore. I'm going to graduate with this anthropology, right?
Yeah.
Degree. And then I'm going to go get a master's degree. And then I'll go to med school.
Yeah. So my drivenness is not, that's why I wouldn't say that I'm a perfectionist, because I didn't go from like A to B. I was like, all right, it wasn't that straight line for me, but my drivenness, it was definitely helped that continued motivation, right? Like to achieve more, to do more. I've always had that. It was just in a different way. I was okay with the detours at the time. I was like, all right, well, let's see where this leads me. So yeah, and I mean, as things have progressed, right, as I've gotten older, as my practice is built, I've been able to put aside some of those other coping techniques. I mean, I'm still working on people pleasing. Most days I'm doing pretty good, but I mean, those roots run deep from when you're a kid, and so it's a process.
And I've noticed that with like myself, if I look back on myself, like I did the same, different trajectory for us, but I did the same thing, right? Like when, so funny, it just hit me. when I was in high school and I was heading to college, right? Um, my dream is like I wanted to go to college to play basketball, but B, I wanted to be a college basketball, or I wanted to be a basketball coach, a girls basketball coach, right? And I imagined myself like winning state championships, maybe coaching at a college level, but really it was like I wanted to be a high school girls basketball coach and teach home ec. It's what I wanted to do, right? I've always wanted to be a coach. um, and so I go to college and they're like, you can't major in home economics and be a coach. Like those two tracks don't go together. If you want to be a coach, which was primary, you have to major in like English or science. And I didn't like those other subjects, right? So I said, okay, like I want to be a coach. I'll major in English. Hated it, of course, right? So then I'm like, well, oh, I don't know what else to do. I know like the health field, like maybe maybe I'll be a doctor. Like I just want to help people, right? And tell people what to do. I was terrified. I had a belief I was terrible at math. I was terrified of college algebra. And so then it's like I can't do these sciences because I'm not going to pass college algebra. So then I just like picked majors. I went through and I looked at majors that did not have college algebra as a math requirement. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just major in counseling. And then you can just see my pathway for the rest of like from all through my 20s and the beginning, early 30s. Like, then I go get a master's in counseling because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Because you can't do therapy unless you have a master's in counseling. And the whole time I'm in higher ed doing academic coaching, academic advising, I spent 50% of my day at work researching other careers. And I decided, like, I'm going to be a physical therapist. I know I still had a belief I can't be a doctor. I can be a physical therapist. And I was confident enough at that point. Like, so I'd go to community college and I would take like biochemistry, and I loved biochemistry and I did well in it. And then I had that stupid college algebra to face. And even as an adult, like I just was so terrified of failing that I would just drop it. I would enroll in it. I'd go the first week. I'd get overwhelmed and I would drop it because I was too scared to fail. And then, I finally get out of higher ed and then I own a gym and then I sell it. And now here I am as a life coach, back to the original dream of being a coach, right? And I took this very long way because I was so afraid of failure. That was it. The whole thing is it had to be perfect. I had to know that I could perfectly achieve it to be willing to attempt it, right? And if I couldn't perfectly achieve it, I was not going to attempt it. And so it's like, okay, now I'm 40. I took this detour to get here, which I could have achieved success so much earlier if I'd have been taught like failure is part of it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a perfect path from point A to point B.
Yeah. And if you'd have been taught, like, we will still be proud of you and love you, even if you get D's.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the power of those seeds that are planted, when we are young, has such an impact, right? I mean, even now, like through our work, right, through our podcast as we're talking, and trying to kind of like pull back the curtain and kind of reveal, look, where does this come from? Where do those, internal pitfalls that keep us from being at the level of success that we want to be, right? Or what's slowing us down. Maybe it's not halting things anymore, but what may still be slowing us down. There's just so much weight on that. But being able to recognize that and look at it and be like, hey, you know what? people pleasing, perfectionism. I see you sitting there, but you don't get you don't get to ride shotgun in this part of the journey anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like my coach was talking to me yesterday about like, I'm just like, I love the A line action, right? I'm like, I need a plan. Give me a plan and I will execute it. And she's like, I'm not going to give you a plan. You don't believe in you and you don't believe in your business. When you start believing in your business and believing in you, I will give you the plan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I was like, well, then tell me the steps to create the belief. She's like, I can't action your way into belief. Like, haven't you figured that out yet? Like, and it was really insightful. And this is why I'm being vulnerable and telling you guys this, right? Because like you're taught as a business, like entrepreneur, like to present like how well your business is doing, right? And not show your cards.
Right.
And I'm showing you my cards that I don't have this belief yet. I was like, well, give me like the actions I need to take to create this belief. And she's like, yeah, that's not how it works. She's like, you've spent your life, Kim, not believing, taking action to create the belief. And when the belief didn't come from the actions, you quit or you gave up because you didn't have belief that was driving the actions. Belief has to come first, then the actions to get the results you want. Versus I was doing actions trying to get results to create the belief.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, even though I really, really want it to work that way.
I think a lot of people want it to work that way, to be honest. Yeah. I don't think we're that different in that sense. There's a lot of people, it's like, oh, yeah, if you show me the roadmap, I can get there. Yeah. But you have to, your square one has to be that belief.
Yeah. And so then it's just like, I just decide like, actions are not going to create the belief. I just have to decide that I'm going to believe in myself. I'm going to have to decide that I believe in my business. And from that decision, I take actions that will eventually create the results to affirm that belief, which is like such a foreign thing for me, right? Like I've practiced the other way for 40 years and now I'm having to like show up in the world completely different. But I see, because I don't necessarily compare maybe, but I like to watch. Like I like to watch these like very successful millionaire people. Like, how did they do it? Because some of them are younger than me. Like Amanda Francis is younger than me. Like, how did you do this? How did you become a multimillionaire in your business? Like, what did you have that I don't have? Because used to I thought they had like this like unicorn DNA stuff, right? Like they were born smarter or more gifted or more charismatic, whatever my brain wanted to use as an excuse, just why they were different than me. Now I know humans are humans with human brains, right? She's not different than me. She's driven like you and I. It's just failure wasn't a thing for her.
It wasn't a big deal. Yeah.
And she could believe and then take action. She wasn't taking action and then creating belief. She just believed and failure wasn't a big deal. And like I know those are the secret sauce to whatever level of success you want.
Yeah.
And like as driven people, you guys listening that are like that are resonating with this, like our biggest hurdle is always going to be the thing in between our ears, right? That's throwing up these thoughts to protect us.
Right.
Like in Carmen's example, like people pleasing, not wanting to disappoint people, right? Feels very real. My example, don't want to fail because I got to be perfect, right? Like our brains are constantly going to provide thoughts, self-doubt, limiting things to keep us in the safe zone.
Right.
And the way I like to say that safe zone is soul sucking.
Yeah.
Like when you worked in hospice, I'm sure you found some joy in it, but was there an aspect of you that was like kind of dying inside because you weren't living your authentic, like your dream?
Um, yes. So I absolutely loved hospice, and hospice was far from what I thought I would be doing in
Mhm.
social work, right? Like I worked with kids, I worked in after school programs, I worked with health disparities. So I didn't think I'd be working with an older population who were at the end of their life. That was the complete opposite end of what I thought I would be doing in social work. And so, but I absolutely loved it. And I didn't realize uh, that what was happening in my brain at the time. I didn't realize what was happening in my mind at the time because the spiritual side of me was being fulfilled working in hospice, right? Because I mean, these people, we were going through life reviews at the end of their life. And so learning, like getting to see their perspective was really fulfilling for me on the spiritual level.
Mhm.
Um, but I kept seeing, um, I kept seeing opportunities that I just thought, you know what, there's such a big disconnect between what these people understand that's happening with them and what the nurses know and what the doctors are saying, right? I mean, and so when I started to see this, I mean, okay, so the people pleasing side kicked in in a positive way because I kept seeing, okay, where's that disconnect, you know, like why is there not good communication between what the doctor's prognosis is, what their expectations are, and what the patients and families understanding was,
Okay.
right? Yeah. And so that people pleasing side of me was like, I want to help these people, how can I do that? And it really, so it helped kind of come a little bit more full circle for me, to get that courage to go back to school because I knew I was missing something big. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, it took me a few years to get the courage to start to enroll in that first physics class and see it through.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I knew that I was helping people and I enjoyed it, but deep down I wasn't doing what, I felt like I was meant to do. Yeah,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we all, and we do. I mean, it's that book, the North Star that we just read in book club last month,
Yeah.
right? Like our soul, essential self, whatever you want to call it, like it has a beacon. It knows where it wants to go. It's just the space between our ears. It's got so much radio static that it's like leads us in 5 billion different directions,
Yeah.
avoiding the essential self's North Star direction that we know is where we're meant to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that radio static comes from so many different directions, right? From how we've been programmed, from our environment around us, right? From people, even our support system, and our biggest cheerleaders to our worst critics.
Mhm.
All of that creates that radio static. So it's not always a clear, like, okay, I have that drivenness, that motivation, right? That like, okay, I can do this. Am going to pursue what I know I meant to do or where I want to be, right? That level of success that I want to be at.
Yeah.
um yeah it's
Yeah.
yeah it I think I think identifying those pitfalls, I think, is really helpful, and it kind of normalizes that, right? Like for driven people, for people who are successful, we all go through that. Like that's a similarity that we have.
Mhm.
It's just of how we perceive it differently,
Yeah.
right? Like how those folks who are successful, or who maybe more successful, as millionaires, billionaires, their belief system and their way of healing those wounds are it's not that they're different, but I think that they are different, but they're less deep seated, maybe. Yeah. or that belief system has changed enough to
Yeah.
overcome the deep rootedness of, you know, how we heal our wounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of like, it's really, I mean, it's because I'm a life coach and I'm immersed in that world. So that's right. Like those are the mentors and my reticular activating system is
yes.
constantly looking for evidence for, right? And there's like so many of them that are millionaires, right? And it's like, is there another industry where there's so many people that are so successful? Or is it like this really is like coaching really is like it's the key to unlock? Like you want success, like you get a coach. Like, I mean, I don't know. You can't blanket that for everybody, right? I'm sure like Elon Musk was just had the perfect mixture of like drivenness and failure resilience that he didn't need someone to help him unwire that static stuff, right? I don't know. I've never studied him enough to know. But
I don't know either, but I do, you know, working in private practice, right? Working on my own business and having colleagues that when we finish and graduate from naturopathic medical school, we have usually two main routes. When you start a private practice on your own, or you join a private practice, right? There are just a sprinkling of like hospital jobs out there. There are some consultant work with nutraceutical companies and all that. So there's like a smattering of those jobs out there. But what's different with naturopathic medical school is that we do have business classes, but we're not business people, right? So like chiropractic docs, when they graduate, they have a significant amount of business education when they graduate, because they already know that a lot of them are going to go into private practice, right? Most chiropractors are private practice, and so they have quite a bit more business education than we do, because our expertise is supposed to be right in helping to heal the human body. And so the business classes are, I don't know, they kind of felt like they were an afterthought, like, oh, by the way, we want you to be successful, so let's try and teach you some business. But it's kind of a different world. But those of my colleagues who are the most successful in their practice have coaches. They have coaches who work alongside them to help them achieve the goals that they want to in their business, help their business be successful, so that they can hire other naturopathic docs and other healthcare practitioners, right? So they can help more people. So I think that I know that there's a lot of value to coaches, but I'm seeing it, for even people who have businesses, who are in the private practice, medical field, even small businesses, they're hiring coaches because it helps to kind of, cut through that static so they can be more successful, and to, you know, kind of help wade through all of that, to get to the point where they want to be.
Yeah. And that, and being in the coaching world, like that's, like I'm networked with so many, and they have so many different practices and specialties, right? Like, and that's like what I've learned is coaching is like, we help you go from one place to another much faster. It's a direct path because we're helping you cut through all of this mental drama that wants you to take all these detours.
Right. Not to say people couldn't do it without a coach, but if you're driven and you're wanting to see that success and reap those benefits, I love, you used to use the analogy of, you know, would you take a bus to California, or would you take a plane? You know, there's multiple ways you can get there. You could take a train to California, but you get to choose what route, or what what route, in my mind, it's a delivery system, right?
Yeah.
You want to do the quickest, most convenient delivery system?
Yeah.
I mean, would you rather take 3 hours, or would you rather take 3 weeks to get there?
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, cool. All right, driven humans, we've got this. We just got to get out of our own way. So, and the best way to get out of your own way is to hire a coach.
Yeah.
We will both attest to that.
Yeah.
Don't walk to California, take the plane ride.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.